And now we finally come to one of my favorite parts of 3ds Max, and that is applying materials. Materials can be called many things. Sometimes people call them textures. Sometimes people call them shaders. But they all do the same thing. They cover or coat our objects in whatever materials we choose. We could apply images. We could apply bumps. We could add transparency in certain areas. Materials are definitely a more complicated arena than they seem. Materials give life and identity to our objects. Earlier we made a jet plane, but was that jet plane a real-world metal jet plane? Or maybe it was made out of plastic, or perhaps glass, maybe even chocolate. You see, materials are what make the difference. That's how our users know what our objects are made out of. I can't wait any longer, folks. Let's get into this. I'm going to go hit the sphere button over here. In the top view, I'm going to make a sphere. Now, to get into the material editor, where we make the magic happen, we can do one of two things. If we have tons of extra time on our hands, we can go up to the main area of the toolbar, get the little hand icon, and scrub until we see this icon for the material editor. Or, if we want to work intelligently, we can keep the main toolbar where it's at and simply hit the letter M for the material editor. See how that works in the M, the material editor? And so here we are in the material editor. And at first, it seems very complicated. And after you've been using Max for about a year, it still seems very complicated. There's a lot here. But it doesn't take too much to get cranking in here. So let me actually move this over so that I can see our object. And again, I mentioned that whenever you make an object, Max applies a default color to it. That's not really a material, that's just a color. And there's two main ways I basically apply a real material to my object. We go to the top of the material editor here, we have these gray spheres. These little slots, as they're called, represent different materials. One of these spheres might look like a wooden sphere for wooden objects in our scene, and we might have a metal sphere for metal objects in our scene, and so forth. So what I usually like to do is apply one of these gray spheres to our object, and then come back here in the material editor and edit it, and then our object will update automatically. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, a lot of people apply materials by dragging the slot over, and as you get over an object where you can apply the material, you will get this icon. Now, people enjoy this because you don't have to select an object. You can just drag and drop materials onto objects, but I don't prefer that way. I like to select my objects, select the material, and then hit this button, Assign Material to Selection. That way, I always know what I'm doing. I never accidentally apply the wrong material to the wrong object. So I'm just going to hit this button, and you'll notice that we get these triangle icons in the corner of my material slot. This indicates that this material is used in our scene. Now, if I were to create another sphere, for example, notice these triangles are no longer white. When you see triangles on a slot in the material editor, such as this, it means that this material is currently being used in your scene. When those triangles become white, such as when I right-click here to select Move and select this object, when these triangles become white, it means that this material is what is applied to the current selection. Now, there's all sorts of options here. We're going to be talking about many of them as we go through this section on materials. But one that I won't mention again, and it's just a personal preference, is this transparency grid. So I can click this, and we get this weird red, green, blue, white, and black checkerboard background. And that lets us see the transparency of our object and how it looks against another scene. So as I go down here to the opacity slider, and I drop that down, we'll see that our object fades in transparency against the background. However, if we have this checkboard off, it kind of looks the same. So I'm going to bump that back up to 100%. Now, that's just a basic intro to materials, but I want to leave you with this one last piece of information. You will hear talk much of maps and also of materials. They sound like they're the same thing, but they are not. Maps, as we go down here to the Maps area in the material editor and open that to expand it, we'll see that we can apply maps to many attributes of our material. We could apply a map, such as a photo, to the color of our object. We could also use maps to determine the bumpiness or maybe even the opacity of the object. We could bring in the map to tell it what it should reflect. And all these attributes, and even others in other parts of the material editor, we can add to control the way our material looks. When Max uses the term material, it encompasses all maps applied for that one material. So in a way, I guess you could think of maps as a sub-object of a material. That's not really the way it works, but that might help you understand what's going on here as we're getting into this. Okay, enough introduction already. We got a gray sphere. It looks horrible. Let's go fix it as we talk about basic material parameters in the next segment.